You're good to go.
Hello, everyone. God bless. This is Efrain. Dios le bendiga a ustedes. Um, Hoy le voy a traer oh, okay, yeah, actually, I'm going to bring you a teaching today in English uh, for um, for uh, for today. I'm going to bring it to you a teaching about the cross of Christ. You know, we're in the Lenten season, and we're reflecting on the cross of Christ and what it means to us. And I actually was hoping to do this with Amanda today, where we have this thing where we sit together and kind of discuss these things. But Amanda was unable to do that today, so it's just be me. But it's gonna be good. So here we go. Um, I was actually thinking about this subject. I was like, um, what do you think of? Like, what comes to mind when you consider the cross of Christ? And a few things, right? You think of pain. You think of the pain that was suffered on the cross. You think of just the idea of sacrifice. You think of um, blood. You think of salvation, right? Now, um, that's just what I think of, you know. But I thought about this. This is interesting. Oh, you know, in some sense, God had to think of the cross too, right? You know, it's like God, the cross didn't take Christ or God by surprise. You know, like we understand that God chose the cross. You know, so it's like, what did God see when He considered the cross? And you actually get an answer for that in the Bible. You get an answer for that in Hebrews 12:2, and this is what it says there. Hebrews 12:2 says, "Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross and scorned its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." So, how does that answer the question? It says, when God considered the cross, he considered it an opportunity to fulfill a joy for himself, you know? So it's like, you think about that. Like, he's going to fulfill a joy just for the joy set before him. So the cross fulfills a joy for God. So it's like, what is this? Like a weird sense of joy? Like, what is that? No, this is what it is. The cross is the mechanism that God has chosen to reconcile people, his image bearers, to himself after they've fallen into sin. So it's like it's a joy to do that. It's a joy for God to reconcile his fallen creation, his his image bearers back to himself because he intended to have a relationship with them. That's what he made them for, right? But we've fallen away into sin, and it is a joy. The cross is an opportunity of joy for God uh, to bring us back to Him. Now that's okay. So you get that much. But why the cross? You know, you think about it. Okay, so this is the opportunity. This is the mechanism that God has chosen to bring His people back to Himself, and that's beautiful. But why? When you think about it, like um, the verse says that He Christ is seeing the cross for the joy set before Him. He's willing to endure it and to scorn its shame. And mind you, what I'm reading from when I read that is the NIV, but you know, lots of versions say basically the same thing: that endure the cross and suffer its shame, scorn its shame. So it's like God has chosen this really hard way to bring His people back to Himself. But why? It's like He's God. Like, couldn't He just do something simpler than all that? Like, why? Uh, have to endure, have to suffer anything. Like, this is the God who, declares things and they're so. right? So why doesn't God just say, uh, I declare you all, innocent of sin. I declare you all reconciled to myself. He could do that. He very well could do it, technically, right? I mean, imagine that's true. So Uh, why suffer it? Now, there's the answer. The answer is this: the wages of sin is death. Uh, this is said very plainly in that same wording in Romans 6:23. And the righteous requirement of justice is that sinners suffer death, right? So what you have here is this kind of thing where it is God's joy to bring these sinners back to Himself, but they've put a death sentence on themselves by not following Him, by choosing their own way. And it is good and righteous, it is just for this to be the case. So, for God to bring us back to Himself and not violate this justice, this requirement of justice, and this requirement of righteousness, God has to deal, like, there has to be, to bring us back to Himself, there has to be a death. Like, the righteous requirement of sin needs to be paid somehow. So, when you see the cross, when that's something you can add to when you look at the cross and consider it, um, what you see is not just pain and sacrifice and blood, but what you see is the seriousness of sin, just how serious it is, that God couldn't just shove it off. God couldn't just say, "Oh well, I know they did all the bad things." You know, the cross is a reminder of just how serious your sin is, and God had to deal with it, right? So, um, now I want to introduce another idea. Um, I got the idea of this teaching primarily by looking at Hebrews and the book of Hebrews. And, the book of Hebrews is essentially um, helping, I guess, a Hebrew audience, actual Jewish people who have all this history of the law and the prophets and all that, helping them understand how Christ fulfills all that, you know, because, they've got all this background, they got all the baggage of all these things. But, here comes Jesus, and Jesus is this, he's kind of tied everything up into a bow, and it's like, and it's this, he's the guy, but it's like, how is he of a piece with everything that came before him? So this brings me to the idea of covenants, right? So uh the book of Hebrews, of course, this is where I started, even to Hebrews 12 too. The book of Hebrews describes Jesus as the priest of a new and better covenant, right? And it goes into this other kind of complicated thing of being a priest in the order of Melchizedek, but that's a little complex. I won't worry about that. But he he is the priest of a new and better covenant. So, this is signaling to the readers of Hebrews that what Jesus is bringing is, again, of a piece with what has come before, a covenant. They had all these covenants with God, and He's bringing a new one. Now, uh, I started thinking, you know, what um, of these covenants, what are the common signifiers of these covenants? Like, what is there, like, a common thread to them? And the book, Hebrews itself, um, establishes it. The common signifier is the shedding of blood. You know, the common thing that happens in all the covenants that God makes uh, between Himself and people. Because that's what covenant, for those who don't know what a covenant is. A covenant is an agreement, right? and it's an agreement that God has come into with people. Um, like all the agreements that God has come into with people are marked with the shedding of blood. He does this. Well, the earliest example I can think of, one of the earliest examples, is with Abraham, right? He's like, you'll be my God, and I'll establish your seed and bless the whole world. And then he establishes that covenant as a sign of it. There's like the shedding of not the well, the dividing of this animal, and then passing in between the split halves of this animal, right? So it's like, okay, like that's the agreement. Like, this is signifies our agreement. Why does it signify the agreement? Because this is why it signifies the agreement. It's like the seriousness of the agreement. There's something of life and death to keep this agreement. It's like, so this is a reminder of it. It's like, uh, may I be cut in half in some sense. May I be cut in half if I don't, keep this agreement that's had with God. So you show that with blood and, uh, the cutting of flesh. Then there's another covenant, right? The Mosaic covenant and the giving of the law. And Hebrews reminds us that even this covenant, you think of when the law is given, you think of, well, Moses goes up to Sinai and he gets the tablets, and then maybe you have like the Charlton Heston version in your head. I kind of do. I've seen that movie enough that I have that version in my head. And you have like this idea of, okay, Moses brings the law, and they make the ark and put the things in it, and all the horrible things that happen. Uh, in between all that, but the Book of Hebrews reminds us that this happened also with the covenant. Book of Hebrews 9, verse 18 to 22 says this: Even the first covenant, this is the covenant of the law, was not put into effect without blood. When Moses had proclaimed every command of the law to the people, he took the blood of calves, together with water, scarlet wool, and branches of hyssop, and sprinkled the scroll and all the people. And he said, This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you to keep. In the same way, he sprinkled the blood both on the tabernacle and everything used in its ceremonies, right? Because, the giving of the law was also accompanied by the instructions of how to build the tabernacle and all that. So he says, In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sin. So, so how do these things come about, right? It's like the righteous requirement of sin and the seriousness of the cross, and then all these covenants that came before it that involve blood. There you go, and it's tied up in that last thing there. That without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. The wage of sin is death. So, and, you know, coming into agreement with God is not a simple matter. It is a matter of life and death. So, like, it's the shedding of blood is also, you think about the cross, right? Because Jesus' blood is shed on the cross. So, the shedding of blood, the seriousness of sin, right? Sin requires death, but and then you get in that idea of the blood being sprinkled, right? You get that idea of blood also being cleansing, right? So it's like, you cleanse the tabernacle and all of this by, the sprinkling of blood. So it's like seriousness of sin, but also brings in the idea of being clean, and the blood being what cleans you, right? So um the old sacrifice, or the old covenant, requires these annual sacrifices, requires um, for a high priest to go into the holy of holies and to um, to bring sacrifice for himself and for everyone. And this is done every year. This is done every year, and it has to keep going on and on and on and on and on. There's like there's no end to that cycle, right? Uh, s- there's no end to it, like because it's not effective in the way that you would think it would need to be, right? Because like if the blood um, cleans people of sin, then you would think that wouldn't they stay clean? you know, like no, they keep on sinning and they keep on sinning, and you know the shedding of the blood of animals and things like that, it didn't change people's hearts. It didn't change their hearts as to necessarily uh, their disposition towards God and following Him and serving Him. Um, it just was a ceremonial reminder. But Christ comes, and here we go. I just want to read this bit here. It's like Hebrews 10. Now, we'll go into this part, which is just lovely. Hebrews 10, verse 3 through 7 says, the sacrifices were an annual reminder of sin. This is now verse 4. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. But here we go. Now here comes the kicker. Therefore, Christ came into the world, and he said, sacrifice and offering you do not desire. This is quoting the Old Testament. Um, Sacrifice and offering you do not require, but a body you've prepared for me. With burnt offering and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, here I am. It is written about me in the scroll, and I have come to do your will, my God. That is a, a quote from the Psalms. So, you know, this these things converge here. Like what what the cross actually is when you look at it, the cross, what you should see in summary is the perfect realization of what God established initially in the law and the sacrificial system. The book of Hebrews basically says that those things were a shadow of like a shadow of what was perfect. Like that the the tabernacle itself was a shadow of like sort of the perfect tabernacle of God. Like it's a realization that's not a realization of something that's imperfect. It's not fully realized. But Jesus Christ is the perfect realization, and his cross is the perfect realization of his love for us, of the seriousness of sin, of the cost of of reconciliation. And it's by his precious blood, that this sacrifice, him as a perfect lamb, it is done once on this cross, and not needed anymore. Not no more blood sacrifices needed any longer. You know, so it's like this thing that had to be done all the time. This symbolic thing of uh, shedding a lamb's blood um, as an atonement for sin, that had to keep being done because you know you just kept being a sinner, and this blood was not what perfectly cleaned you. um, Jesus Christ's blood is what perfectly cleans you, and faith in him applies that perfect blood to you, so that now you receive his grace, you receive his salvation, and you need nothing else. So when you consider the cross, is I guess so. I that's what I'm thinking about. Just remember those things, that it's like um, the cross is a reminder. The cross is a reminder of what Paul says actually in Romans 11:22. What he calls the kindness and severity of God. The kindness in that, like, the cross brought you peace, brought you salvation. Jesus' blood cleansed you, but that cleansing was won by sacrifice. That cleansing was won by death, and ultimately won by the death and the sacrificing, the shedding of blood, and secured by resurrection. You know, unlike the lambs and the goats and all the things, when they were shed, when their blood was shed, that was the end for them. Then they burned them up. That was it. Um, Jesus, he sheds his perfect blood, cleanses you, and then death can't even hold on to him. He raises from the dead. And when you uh, are identified with him, then that same thing, that same thing applies to you. You know, the the same power that raised Jesus from the dead is in you. You know, and that's just beautiful. That really is just tremendous. So yeah, so that's what I think about when I think about the cross. And I hope that this has blessed you guys. Uh, and I realize Amanda's a little better than me about this. Uh, she opens up another thing and pays attention to the chat. I did not do that. So, I just talked at you. I'm sorry. Next time I got to remember to look at the chat or something. Uh, pull it up on the phone. But either way, God bless you guys, and you have yourself a good day or good night.